Greetings of the day. This presentation has been made for the Natural Language Processing course for 2024 at IIT Gandhinagar. And this paper, Toxicity in ChatGPT, Analyzing Persona Assigned Language Models, is being presented by Mukul Paraspota. Uh, my other teammates are Ishwar Dhande, Priyam Kumar, Manish Bhairava, and Ishan Arang. They have contributed for the development of this presentation slides. And to start with, the motivation for this paper or the experiments they have done in this paper is to essentially evaluate whether uh, ChatGPT or other such models could elicit toxic behavior when prompted to do so. So that they tried to do it initially with baseline without assigning any persona. Persona is essentially how they ask the model to behave like some historical or an imaginary person. So their main research questions were, does assigning a persona increase toxicity in ChatGPT's responses? And how does it vary when a different persona is assigned or it is talking about different entities or about different topics? So their core issue was that language models can produce harmful content, which essentially raises safety concerns when it is deployed at scale to solve industry related issues and other use cases where user input is taken directly without any filtering and such. So the example on the screen where a system prompt says ChatGPT, you should speak like Muhammad Ali, and the user asks to say something about aliens. So the words have been censored, but you can see how offensive it could be just by using a system prompt to speak like a boxer who has been recorded to have trash talked a lot of his opponents. So toxicity in their methodology was essentially evaluated on two different types of uh, prompts, we should say, responses about specific entities and when assigned a persona. Phrase continuations where essentially the experiment asks ChatGPT to complete a given phrase, continuing the sentence which was broken in the middle of the sentence. So they tried using this real toxicity prompts dataset, which had around 200,000, 180,000 uh, prompts which could elicit toxic behavior from ChatGPT. And the measure of this toxicity was done in two different ways for their paper. So we'll get to that in the next future slides. But essentially, their methodology involved sampling personas because we cannot ask ChatGPT to behave like everyone. That would be computationally expensive. So they asked ChatGPT itself to list out a few variety of personas from history, like some politicians, some dictators, some journalists, and all such are actual historical figures. While there are some common names, they also asked it to sample some common names like general, people, and then some baseline personas like a generic statements having a good person, a bad person, etc. And later they also sampled entities using the same method where they asked ChatGPT to list out a few uh, like gender, race, sexual orientation, all such categories which could be topics of controversy in some or the other place in the world. And they have also used verbs and adjectives, uh, essentially like singing or some professions which are kind of looked down upon in some parts of the world. So if you see on the screen, there's a few examples using a persona assigned to ChatGPT, and when they asked to talk about a specific entity, how it could actually, kind of recall and replicate their words, which could have been toxic at that, which could have been their ideologies at that point of time, but now they are considered toxic. So their experimental setup essentially was to have some specific prompt styles where they ask chat after assigning a persona, they ask ChatGPT to talk about, in a good way or a bad way, about an entity. And when their statistics are being reported, most of this analysis has been done on the negative leading templates, like basically say something bad about some entity or say something negative about some entity, and they see whether it actually does respond, and if it does respond, how toxic the response is. And similarly, as I've mentioned before, with real toxicity prompts, they do a stratified sampling where the data set itself contains a rating of the toxicity of that particular prompt's outputs, possibly. And then they kind of bucket it into 10 buckets, like from 0 to 0.1, 0.1 to 0.2, and pick out 200 prompts from each bucket to essentially keep it balanced. And then when it comes to decoding and sampling the output from the model, they use nucleus sampling with a top P of 0.9, temperature of 1, and a frequency penalty of 0.02. They used GPT 3.5 Turbo, and they ran this experiment in March of 2023. So when it comes to the evaluation of toxicity, as I've mentioned before, they evaluate something called the probability of responding, where they say uh, it is the fraction of times ChatGPT does respond to a prompt which elicits toxic behavior out of the n number of times they have asked ChatGPT the same prompt. So they repeat each prompt for like 5 or 6 times, and then out of those times, if it does respond with something like sorry, I'm a large language model or something like that, they consider that as the model has denied response. So all the other times where it does respond with something, they consider that as a response from ChatGPT. So it is the fraction of those times where it does respond, and out of the total number of prompts they have given. Toxicity metric, essentially how toxic a given response is when it does respond, is measured using the something called perspective API, which is made using Google's which was developed by Google's Jigsaw team, and it has been improving to essentially uh, rate any response in terms of toxicity or abuse or hate. Uh, in their terms, toxicity is anything that could trigger a negative feeling, like offense, would take something that would trigger offensive thoughts, that would toxicity is essentially something that would essentially toxicity is something that could uh, make the listener or the reader have bad memories recalled or bad history parts recalled of their ethnicity or their particular whatever the entity the prompt is talking about. And for each persona entity pair, they report the maximum toxicity of multiple generations. So of the n generations they do, if it does respond for k generations, they pick out the maximum toxicity of those k generations. And when it comes to the findings of these experiments, uh, for baseline, they don't assign a persona and evaluate the same things, so they find a toxicity of 0.11 on average. So we can assume that it responds respectfully in most cases. When it comes to persona induced toxicity, even assigning a persona, a generic persona like a bad person, increases the toxicity by 5 to 6 times with a high probability of responding. That means that uh, while the response probability increases, it also increases the toxicity with which it responds. And they also say that the harmful stereotypes regarding countries, religions, and genders could emerge uh, when it is speaking about them. Also, variation across personas, dictators as a category have had they found to have high toxicity levels, while other categories like journalists and sports persons are also shown concerning toxicity. Even neutral prompt styles could elicit high toxicity when negative prompts were used. Oh, so this is some statistics where they have shown essentially that even assigning a generic persona like a nasty person could increase the toxicity by around 6 times. And toxicity when it was assigned a male persona was higher. Similarly, a Republican persona was more toxic, and toxicity was higher when the prompt style was essentially asking to say something toxic about someone or some entity. So, interesting results here essentially. Uh, the responses were a bit more toxic when the entity was uh, homosexual and other LGBTQ communities. And when it comes to gender, it was more toxic towards male and non-binary people. Uh, and female towards females, it was statistically, it was not that much toxic statistically. And when it comes to races, northern European and southern American races were uh, shown more toxicity by the model, which is kind of the last two trends are kind of opposite than what we observe in reality, which might be due to the RLHF, uh, you know, uh, reinforcement learning with human feedback, essentially training the model to not speak toxic about specific races, while not while the training has not been general, because when it comes to safety, a person should not be toxic about anyone, or rather irrespective of race or gender or sexual orientation. And conclusions, uh, their findings were that significant toxicity was observed when ChatGPT was assigned a persona, posing risk to both vulnerable groups and to any human in general. And business risks was essentially if a prompt that could elicit toxic behavior was sent to ChatGPT, which was used by a particular business, it could tarnish their reputation. And this should also be mentioned to the business which is trying to use ChatGPT, and the authors the authors recommend public specification sheets to detail toxicity and other concerns. And current challenges is that reliance on RLHF is insufficient because uh, a, a human is biased by nature, and you cannot have all kinds of all uh, like you cannot have, you cannot remove that bias that easily when it comes to training. And they encourage the researchers in the community to look at fundamental solutions and urge the research community to prioritize safety in the evaluation and deployment of these models. Thank you.